Welcome to another episode of the I'm Telling God About This podcast, and in breaking news, I have had another child. I now have 3 children, 3 years old and under. I am...
Celebration!
That's such a good sound effect. We are... Alright, turn it off. We are actively losing sleep. We have had the 3rd night was the best night yet. I wake up every hour. I have a toddler who is also using the potty in the middle of the night, practicing going to get potty trained, and I have a 4-day-old. So in this episode, stick around to find out why having children is the way to secure your lineage, help.
It makes you better than other people.
It makes you better than other people.
Say what we mean, okay?
Yeah. Don't tiptoe around it, man.
Fine. How to outbreed the crazies in this episode of the I'm Telling God About This podcast. So, gentlemen, now that all of us in the room, with one who's about to have a baby here in a couple months, we're all going to have above replacement rate for our families. How does it feel to know that your lines are secured and your future generations, the light is bright for them?
Well, what's interesting is there's such an anti-child sentiment in culture today. It's almost like having a child and showing somebody, like a coworker, pictures of your child is a attack on their lifestyle choices. Like it's a trigger warning or something.
Right.
You notice that kind of that being
Dude, the
thing?
amount of friends we have that their little faces light up when they hear we're having another kid and or the ages of our children, and it's like they're like, oh, you're going to be buying a new house, or how are you guys doing that? And oh my gosh, and it's like it's so funny for Brittany and I, because it's like the most fun, joyous season of our entire life, the most fulfilled I've ever been in 36 years. It's like, yo, I'll have 3 more. Let's go.
Yeah.
Right. With this very specific exception, like, you don't have to have, like, married people with children don't have to go and make little TikToks and be like, you know, I'm really happy with my choice to be married and have kids. Like, who are you trying to convince? It's only people without those things that go on and they're like, I'm so happy being single. You know what? I'm fine. I'm fine with it with just me. You know, that's okay. It's like, well, then why? What are you here for?
And if you're listening right now and you weren't able to have children, this episode is not for you. We feel for you. Our heart goes out to you. Some of you may or may not know, but my wife and I, we lost our first child 6 hours after birth. So there is a very real reality that some people aren't able to be blessed with children. But from this point of view, we all have been able to have children, and there is a blessing there that's worth discussing, because I think our culture dunks on parents more than I've ever seen. And it really gets under my skin.
Oh, yeah. They always portray... No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, on the note that Tim's saying, so what we're saying is this is, you know, in true form for our channel. Like, we're not going to sit here and caveat and apologize on every instance. We're having this conversation in good faith. We are saying this with a full understanding and disclosure that not everybody can have children. We're saying this with the full knowledge and understanding that is a sensitive topic. So if that's for you, then this episode's going to be tongue in cheek, and we're going to poke fun at people who have the opposite opinion, and it's meant to be a means of talking about the more serious reality of the theological implications of you know, making the choice, key word, right? Making the conscious choice to not be fruitful and multiply. So yeah, just take that for what it's worth. But yeah, so, you know, the reason for that is because there's a counter prevailing narrative, right? Like a couple weeks ago or a month or 2 ago, there was this whole huge, you know, TikTok trend on, like, you know, dinks.
So
like, we're dinks, you know, we eat all the snacks in our house.
Gratuitously about the trivial stuff.
What's a dink?
Here, let me go ahead and share what a dink is real quick.
Oh, you have one?
We're dinks. We go to Trader Joe's and workout classes on the weekends.
We're dinks. We get into snobby hobbies like skiing and golfing.
We're dinks. We can go to Florida on a whim.
We're dinks. We're already planning our European vacation next year.
Dinks, we get a full 8 hours of sleep, and sometimes more.
So cringy.
We get desserts and appetizers at restaurants.
We're dinks. We can play with other kids and give them back.
We're dinks. We still do it 3 times a week.
We're dinks. We spend our discretionary income on $8 lattes.
We're dinks. We
Like, there's a lie underneath their
I got
sad
one.
We're
faces
dinks.
that you can
We don't
just
use our
see.
kids or dog as an excuse to leave a party. We just leave. We're dinks.
I got one.
Ah,
All right, here it
There you
is. They're dinks. They're going to die alone with somebody else wiping their ass.
Yeah, that's
Right,
true
we need
though.
to
You
hang
know,
on to
when
this.
when you talk to, there's been a couple videos and different interviews with people, and I've talked to pastors and stuff that work in hospice and deal a lot with that. And one of the number one things that people talk about being their biggest regret is like there's nobody there at the end.
Yep.
And the older you get, and that's what it's about,
Yeah.
is who do you have to spend time with in the last 30 of your life, as
Yeah.
opposed to the front. So yeah, it's all fun and games. And hey, spoiler alert, like most good things in life, there's a season of struggling with it.
Right.
Like children are tended like a garden. Yeah, it's a pain to stand over them and make sure that they don't die every 10 seconds and clean up after them and do all these other things. But then you reach, each different stage has its own reward. Like, mine are older than you guys's, and I'm at the stage now where I just taught my girls to swim, and Avery just jumped off of a full-blown high dive 2 days after learning to swim, and I got to watch my little girl
That's awesome.
Bravely climb up to the top of this
Yeah.
thing and just jump off, and dude, I'm sorry, you can keep your Trader Joe's lattes. I'm
I
good.
agree.
Right,
Yeah.
listen
I
to all the
agree.
stuff that they're trading for it too, and you're just like, okay, yeah. Well, and people with that selfish mindset, because that's the other thing. It's not just their choice not to have kids, but there are people that I know who couldn't have kids, but because they didn't have that horrendous mindset that is on display there, just live for yourself, be the consummate consumer. They invested heavily in other people. So those people, even though they didn't have kids of their own, they're not going to die alone. They're not going to be forgotten, because they still spent their lives channeling what they maybe wished had been energy they could have funneled into their own children into other things and relationships and people, not just Trader Joe's lattes.
right. Well, and I mean, adoption is also an option too, right?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
And so it's not just it's not like the world is short of orphans, or
Right.
people or kids that need
Yes.
parents, and it's it's
There's
a struggle.
a lot
I
of
mean,
layers of controversy in adoption, though.
Sure,
I'm not.
but ultimately
Really?
at the core,
And money,
at the core
so
of
Oh
it,
yeah.
Sure. At the core of,
Yeah.
of the benefit, though, these kids need parents, and we have friends that was Todd and Laura. They did foster care, and then they
Foster to
adopted
adopt,
their kids. I mean, what an awesome experience that as a community we were able to also experience that with them.
Yeah.
And we were there. Gosh, we were there through those struggles, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't easy. It was
Not
hard.
easy.
Sometimes we had to leave early. Sometimes we
Yeah.
had to just pray for them, But then we also saw the reward, right? And seeing these kids understand that they were loved, So really cool aspect of that as well. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there's going off of what you said, Josh. I would trade all the lattes, all of the vacations, all of that for a chance to see my son do something and grow on his own. I mean, just the other day we went to a baseball game locally here, AAA baseball game, and beforehand he wanted to go on a playground, and there was a bounce house and all that stuff. And so we did rock wall, and I'm seeing him progress. I'm seeing him, be athletic and everything. We get into the bounce house, and there's these two boys, his age, his size, and they're like, "Hey, only come in here if you're wrestling." I don't know these kids. And I was
Oh, wow.
well, luckily for you, or unfortunately for you kids, we've been wrestling at home on some mats. He's got a brother about the same weight and size.
That's
so
awesome.
At your own risk. And my son, bragging mode, proceeded to take out both of these kids by himself.
Dude,
It was they're
that's
like, "Oh, this
amazing.
kid's really good at wrestling." I started recording it. I'm like, I'm going to show my wife later. Wrestling is important. Boxing is important. And so you see all these
it is.
really cool things like that. You're like, man, I'm proud dad. And I saw him I saw him walk away a different person. That level of confidence clicked in him. He was like the wild man from the West. Like, he walked out of there and he was like, "Yeah, Dad, they were trying to hurt me,
straight
but I
swagger.
took him down." And then he's like, "Oh, I have 2 moves. Here's my move this, here's my move that." And I'm just like, "Oh, son, enjoy it." Like, this was a victory, right?
But
so it's things like that I love. I would trade all of the experiences by myself for just that moment. You know?
And you know what? This is the big lie. And so I'll say this too. Like, if you're in our main demographic, which is mostly like 18 to 30-something-year-old men, from what I'm reading. But hey, shout out to the ladies here as well. This is the thing that I've told people since we started having kids is like, it's also a lie that you can't do both of those things. Like,
that's right.
You make choices, you know?
Right.
Like, I have traveled with my kids. I mean, my children have been camping since they were like infants. And when I mean infants, I mean like weeks, months old. Like, you can do a lot with a child. It's just a question of, how much effort you want to put into it and how much willingness to do that.
Is the portion that's actually portrayed to everybody in virtually every form of media, right?
Yep.
You've got the lazy, overweight, buffoonish, incompetent father, right, who doesn't have any connection with his kids. You've got the overstressed, overworked,
wine mom.
All of this stuff. But that's all you ever see. You never actually see parental relationships or roles executed the way all of us, do it, for instance.
Yeah, we talk about, like, we took, like, we were at Oktoberfest last year, and my kids, my kids are 8, 7, and 5. Maybe
and that's
about
old
to turn
enough
9.
to drink, and they don't tell you that.
Yeah, and they don't tell me. But we had them all. That's not what happened, for the record. But we had them in their, like, lederhosen, and, the girls had their Drindel, which is like the folksy, German outfits, and we're out walking around. And for those of you who don't know, Oktoberfest is like, it's like the county fair, basically. There's rides and, shops and all of that. And so we're walking around, and we realized, like, not a lot of younger kids around, but everybody loved it. All of the Germans thought it was the coolest thing. The kids loved it. It was hectic, it was crazy, but but that's part of it, is showing people, like, getting out there, having kids, taking your kids, being out in the world, and pushing back against, the lie. A lot of the reason that people, some of you might be listening and be like, well, that's not my experience. Like, having kids is really hard, and I do feel stuck at home, and I don't have any fun. Well, here's what I would say to you. Why is that? Like, ask yourself why that is the case, because here's the reality. I feel like a lot of time, like, it's easy to have a pity party and to be like, oh, this is hard, because it is hard. I'm not saying it's not hard. It is. But if you're told, like, oh, you don't have to do this because you're a mom with a young child, like, you're entitled to be at home and be angry when things don't go your way, or you're a dad of, a newborn, you're entitled to be frustrated and, like, exhausted and all of this. It's like, we make choices, we have to structure our lives and build our community and have relationships around us that support us, that point to an appropriate perspective on how we're supposed to be living our lives, so it doesn't always have to be like that. I feel like sometimes we're like that because that's, to your point, Tim, what we're told, like, that's how it's going to be.
But the people who give into that mindset, who have kids, because just because you have kids doesn't mean you haven't succumbed to that negative portrayal.
Right.
They're falling into the pattern that they've been shown, and not choosing and they've given the sense of futility that says, well, this is just what having kids is. This is
your life now.
Drag. Why? I mean.
Well, I would encourage people that are experiencing hard times with parenting and saying, "Oh, I couldn't ever do a trip to do this, or we couldn't. If we were to go out, it would just be chaos." And like, okay, but here's the thing: an adventure is not an adventure if it's just smooth and mundane.
That's right.
Okay? Like,
that's a trip.
One of the things, and let me brag on Josh Hughes here. We had we were in Maryland when we were, we went and we did like a summer cabin. We did with our little community group, and we rented a bunch of canoes and
Oh my
or I would
God.
say divorce
I forgot
boats.
about this.
Divorce
we basically
boats.
some like kayaks and canoes, and we did it on like a little
What is
river
a
and lake and
divorce
everything.
boat?
And
It's a tandem kayak.
it's a tandem kayak.
Oh, I see.
That's some good marriage
Just
counseling
gentlemen,
right
let me
there.
save you. Let me save you some. Be in the back of the boat, not the front. Okay. Anyway, so
No.
basically
no.
we would go up.
Demonstrate your leadership. Let her know that she's got to follow, or you're going
Oh
sideways.
my god.
Well, good luck. We're trying to go and muscle all the directions. The front of the boat is not where the power of the boat.
Anyway,
comes.
we digress.
So what I'm saying is, like, we went and we were on this this little river, and it was getting a little bit rough, and one of our guys capsized and was like, "I'm done. Not gonna do this." And then Josh and Danelle, they were like, "Guys, look, let's just do this. Like, let's go down. It's gonna be hard. It's gonna be rough, but look, it's gonna be worth it in the end. So make the decision right now that this is gonna suck." Embrace the suck, and when we're done with this, and we got those people that didn't come with us picking us up, like, we're gonna be the winners here, right? And so we did, and it was tough, and there was capsizes, and we got wet, and we got stuck in the river, but we had a blast. And you know what I remember about that trip? It's not about sitting. I don't remember sitting back and eating the breakfasts and playing games and stuff. What I remember is going on the kayak. I remember going on those canoes. It was awesome, especially when we got to that one part where it was just like white waters, and we're like, let's do this. Let's go, And then we went through it, and that 30 seconds to a minute of going through chaos was worth every minute of the struggle before. And so,
And an
full
important
circle,
life lesson.
that moment when you have kids that you go out and there's a struggle, and they come back and they're like, "Dad, I am so glad you took me here. Dad, this was so fun. Mom, I loved this so much." Or, "Well, guys, are you so glad that you're my parents?" Those comments, again, like 30 seconds, worth it all, guys. So that's what I would encourage you guys. It sucks. There's a struggle, but ultimately, at the end of the day, like, it's worth it all.
No,
It's worth it all.
it doesn't suck. It doesn't suck. Like,
I would agree with that, too.
I
I would
reject.
agree with that,
no,
too.
I
I actually
reject
agree with
that
that, too.
other side of
As-
the coin attitude.
sure, as defined.
because you're
I agree with that,
you're
too.
granting that attitude. This, it's going to suck, but then there's this. No, it just flat out doesn't suck. Okay, like if you're
It's hard.
If you're,
It's
Not
okay.
suck.
So
hard.
fine, change the word. Change the word. That's what I mean. But
That's what it is.
ultimately, at the end of the day, it's worth it, guys.
Yes, it's worth
What
it.
I'm saying.
Doing
So-
hard things is worth it. And the real moral of that story is Josh was right. That's the important.
So I got a question for you guys. In the mentality of the couples, the parents that you've seen, I've noticed something that I can almost immediately tell you who's going to be a grumpy parent around having children or not. And it's like, if you have friends and then they get married, and when they get married, you see it coming, and you're like, okay, you've been all about yourself for a while. You're in for a ride, and you know it, and you see it coming. And then it's like you find out they're pregnant, and you're like, okay, so marriage is like barely practicing selflessness 101. When you have a child, you no longer exist. This is parenting 800. And it's hilarious to watch them when that happens, because they will fight it kicking and screaming. I want my time. I want my time with the guys. I want to do this. I want to do this. Me. And I'm like, to Tim's point, I have found the most joy in parenting because I now have new eyes. I see the entire world through the eyes of my children.
Yeah.
We are rolling around in the grass. I'm getting from home, and I'm teaching them how to drag the trash can to the curb. That just became fun. Everything is new
Right.
eyes, and it's the coolest thing.
It is.
But
Getting
the
to
longer
show
you
them.
try to sit there and clutch and hang on
Yes.
to a self-centered
Yep.
life, because you're
Hard
not
up.
going to be able to do it, first
Yep.
of all,
Right.
and you're going to then also not be doing any of the good, rewarding things that you should be doing now
Yep.
that you have children, and so it's just completely spoils
And
it.
so-
So, because
What's the biblical principle here, right? Like, I mean, this is kind of the whole idea. It's, selfless love. What does it mean to be?
that's
What
good.
does it mean? Like, I see this a lot in marriage counseling and dealing with parents and stuff. And a lot of it, like we talked about last episode, first question I usually ask people is, what is your definition of love? How do you understand that? And the reality is, even within a lot of Christians, you know, there's a high level of consumerism, even in Christian culture. And I mean, it's part of it. We choose our spouse, right? We're selecting for traits and people, you know, characteristics and you know, attraction and all that good stuff. And then you start down the road of, you know, realizing, oh, it's not all about me. But to Nick's point, what's wonderful about like the general pattern of human existence is usually after getting married, babies, generally speaking, there's not a lot of contraceptive involved, generally tend to come pretty quickly after that, right?
Yeah.
And there's no better crash course in selflessness than having a baby. And there's no greater crash course than having 2 babies. Because then you can't just leave it with one parent and roll. Somebody's always got to be doing something. So, you know, it's incredibly sanctifying for us as individuals. So here's the kind of the idea if you're keeping score. Why have kids? Well, 1, it's a commandment, right? Be fruitful and multiply. 2, because it's sanctifying for yourselves and for your spouse. Your job as a husband, if you're a husband, is to shepherd and to disciple your spouse and your family. And having children is like a way to throw gasoline on that fire, right? Because it's overwhelming for both parties, but especially to young moms, I think, in many cases. And then for yourself, because there's no greater forcing function for fulfillment too, but a forcing function for selfless service than when you have no other choice. Like there's nothing worse than wanting, because all the good stuff we talked about, you know, when we had our first, when the 4 of us lived in the same town, I was the only one with kids, and at least initially. And so,
we loved your kids. It was so cool having your kids there.
It was wonderful. But we had a 7-week-old baby when we all moved there. Josh and Lindsay didn't have their first quite yet. And so, you know, what was really hard for me was I was in seminary, I was working full time, and we had all 3 of our kids in that 4-year period. And there was nothing worse than the fact that like I would have to do all of the things that I needed to do to provide for my family and set the course that God had called us on, but then desperately wanting to be at home and spend more time with my children. And it was so hard. And that really showed, like, I think that's when it really clicked for me of like, oh man, like this is an impossible equation. Like this is that's like the sacrifice portion of it is like, man, like this is brutal, you know? And it was really hard. And it's even hard now, you know? I think it's part of being a dad is it's hard when your responsibilities keep you further away from those things, and how you have to work to like optimize your life towards you know, prioritizing. But yeah, that's a whole other thing. I won't keep rolling on that. We can swing back around.
Going off of what you said, Josh, speaking of talking about like choosing your wife and what do you want, what qualities do you want in a wife, talking to men here, I found a really cool reel I thought that was pretty funny. So let me share.
All right, let's see it.
About hold on, let me see. You see my screen?
I was gonna say, yeah, go for it.
I'm looking for a trad wife, sourdough, homestead, crunchy, eats meat, butter, wants kids, chickens, tinfoil, tallow, content, Jesus.
Okay,
Nailed
that
it.
is cute. That is cute.
That's a trend we can get behind. 100%.
Well, I to that end too, I would say, Josh, you touched on it's a commandment from God, and you touched on the fact that it's sanctifying. But I would add at least I would add 2 more from my perspective of like why I love having kids. Those 2 are like, yes, obey God's commandments. Yes, move towards sanctification. But it is also the most fulfilling thing I've ever had or done in my entire life. Obviously, we're not disputing that here on the podcast, but I think a lot of people do. And I don't think that narrative is broadcast enough. Like, it is literally not even having to try, the most fulfilling thing I've ever done in my entire life. And then I would say a 4th for me is, I don't know if it's explicitly in the Great Commission, but for me, part of it really does feel like encountering and helping bring about the kingdom of God here and now with my children, because in so much as I can help bring about the kingdom in my sphere of influence. When I have children, if I can simply give that to my children, replicate that, teach them that, train them up in the way that they should go, and they will not depart from it, that, I don't know, for me it's just exciting because I have these little kingdom intercontinental ballistic missiles that are getting prepared to launch, and it's like, yo, we're going to go wreck some shop for the Lord.
I want to hit on that because that's so true. Because here's the reality: we've talked about this so many times. You know, what is the key indicator of a mature Christian? They bear fruit, correct?
Yeah.
Like you disciple other people. The reality is for most Christians, I would argue, especially Christian men that I encounter, like the majority of them don't really start thinking about discipling anyone. Maybe they've done so with their spouse until they have their children. And I remember sitting on the couch in Tim's house having this thought. Now, luckily, I grew up different, so it wasn't me, but I do remember very distinctively sitting on your couch when we were talking, and I was holding Avery, and she was like this big. Mm-hmm. And I was holding her, and I was kind of overcome because I was just like, it kind of dawned on me in that moment that, like, you know, I love that little girl so much, but it kind of came to me that I could do everything in my power, but I can't choose Jesus for her. I have spent the last, you know, up until, you know, I mean, like she got saved, up until she got saved and baptized, you know, at, you know, like 6 years old, that 6-year period. And again, you know, whether she'll continue in the faith and whatnot, you know, that's a continual discipleship and development, but that's usually for a lot of people, that's your first mission field. That's your first, you know, field, and it should be anyway. You should be doing it outside.
Oh, and we've known people who have been broken by that as well.
Also,
because 100%. They couldn't deal with that risk and kind of went down the how could a loving God, whatever.
Send people to, you know, that's a really good point, because it's terrifying. And for a lot of people, they have trouble with that. And so, you know, but I would just tell you that, like, that feeling of having children made me a better pastor, made me a better leader, because
it makes you better overall.
It does. It made me so empathetic.
Of the number of parallels that are intentionally baked in to the familial relationships, whether it's between husbands and wives and parents. It is. Well, because some of those comparisons are explicit, right? You have, you know, Christ is the head of the church as man is the head of the wife, and things like that. And that gives you perspective of what the nature of that relationship is supposed to look like and how you're supposed to execute it, both for men and women. And then, of course, you know, myriad parallels when it comes to children, you know, us being, obviously, you know, having a heavenly father and children in that respect. And as you just go through, like I was going downstairs, right, with my first child. This is years ago, right? And I've got her by the hand, and she's like gripping onto the railing. And I'm like, yeah, that's really adding a lot to your personal security in this situation, right? But then you see it, if you abstract that and you recognize that you, as a parent, are fulfilling the role of the Lord in that situation, it's like, oh, that's me again. Okay, you know,
right? It's such
and
a
that's the parallel for
where we fall short in our relationship with God. Yeah,
that's the parallel from the the empathy thing for me is, you know, until I had kids, I was if you guys think that I like dunking on people now, you should have seen me before I had kids. Like, I was merciless.
Knocked you down a couple pegs.
Oh, it so did, because now, you know, I look at someone being, you know, retarded, and I'm like, oh man, you just had bad parents, or, you know, like you're just like you're somebody's kid that, like, didn't get what they needed, you know, because when you get to see how a human develops and grows up close, you start to understand how thought patterns emerge. You start to understand how behavior comes out of, you know, your circumstances in a lot of ways. And it's made me incredibly empathetic towards towards behavior. And for my job too, because I see a lot of counseling and a lot of issues, like, I'll sit down with people sometimes and I'll just be like, let me paint a picture for you and you tell me if this is accurate. And I'll lay out like their situation and they're just like looking at me like I'm some kind of a wizard or like, like I have magic powers. And it's like, no, I have kids. Like I know why you're broken because I know what you're supposed to deal with, what you're supposed to have in your life. And I also know what happens when you don't have that. And that's the tragedy, And so like, I think a lot of what's going on in our society, both governmentally, in the church, has a lot to do with that distance from like lack of prioritization in the family and like the creation of families.
Yeah, I'm completely there with you. I would say, it's so cool. Yeah, I think it's good to sit on the hard thing for a minute too, because it's like, yes, it's hard. Yes, I lose sleep. Yes, I only got 3 hours of sleep last night. But like anything worth doing is difficult. It's not worth the ease of it all. And man, I think about back to the whole DINK, which I didn't even know what that was, by the way. So it's dual income, no children,
no kids.
No kids. Sorry, no kids. And it's like, I joked with Brittany yesterday. I was like, "Hey, guess what, honey? We now have so many hands to wipe our butts when we get older." And it's like, for me, I mean, I say that jokingly, but you all are probably similar to me in our ages where our parents, they're not there. But I would say as wise children, as the oldest, I know this is something I'm already doing. I'm already processing stuff like this with my parents, where it's like, all right, I know, like, what are we doing? Where are you going? Is stuff in place? Like, are we ready? Like, how can we come alongside of you as the children? Because my parents had 4 kids. I was the oldest of 4. And so whether or not it's built this way in your house or in your family, I have just taken on that mantle. And so one funny way I do it right now is I force all the kids and all the people that married into the family, we do something called farm work weekend because my parents live on a farm. They're getting a little bit older. They're still fine, but it's like, yo, let's go serve my parents for 3 days, hard manual labor, 10-hour days. I act as the like general contractor and I'm like making sure we're getting it. And it's such a blessing to my parents. And we've been doing this now for 5 years. We got another 25 years to go before my parents, are really in a season of not being able to take care of themselves. But it's like I'm already thinking about this as the oldest son. And so now with my children, I'm one, excited to teach them about this. And they're, European families, non-Western families. It was normal to have the elderly living with the family.
That's been normal for most of human history.
Yeah,
exactly.
On that note,
exactly.
On that note, like I joke, like we were talking about this in the financial episode, and I didn't bring this up, but I should have. That's my retirement plan. I always tell people I'm on the Eastern retirement plan.
That's great.
And they're like, "What's that?" And I'm like, "I'm raising my kids that they have the responsibility to take care of me in my old age. Like, I get you into your prime earning years, and then I stop earning." Like,
oh yeah, I mean, that totally counts too.
That's my. Like, that's the move. Like, I invest in your future and you sustain my ride into glory. Like, that is my game plan. Because in Asia, I mean, that's how it still is. That's still an expectation in Asian cultures. But it's not, in Western culture, we have this mentality. Yeah. And, when I worked for that in-home health company in that retirement center, like, that became painstakingly obvious to me, to your point, Nick. I've had the same conversations like we've talked. And even watching my mom and dad deal with my grandparents and their decisions and how they're handling that. But yeah, we talk with our kids now, say the same thing. That's the Hughes retirement plan. My kids, they're going to take care of us. But see, there's another major reason that we should be having kids. So we talked about, hey, biblically, have kids if you can. Do that. It's a good thing. It's a commandment and all the good stuff that comes from it. We've dealt with the lies and the common misconceptions. But then we got this other reason
Kind of a big
to do
deal.
it. That's it.
Kind of a big
Population
deal.
decline. Perhaps you're familiar.
Jeez.
Things aren't going great. As you can see, this is
just the United States too. This
it's
isn't even
not.
globally.
This
Just
isn't
the
our
US.
economy. This isn't a.
Oh
this
yeah,
isn't
like
an
Germany, where
economic
you
graph.
are, is at like 1.4.
Oh yeah, man. Greece, way
The-
worse. Japan, abysmal.
Yep.
Yeah.
There was a
So-
study
Yeah.
that was done in 2017 by Popular Population Reference Bureau. I don't know how legitimate they are, but that's what I saw. They seem pretty legit. But they
we're
were
going
talking
with it,
about
'cause
from to like the estimates between 2017 and 2050, the top 5 or 10 countries that are going to suffer the most like population decrease are China, Japan, Ukraine, Poland, Romania, Thailand, Italy, and South Korea. Like, and it's not even like the gap between China and everyone else is abysmal. Like, it is so big because China is their one-child policy for so
Shot
long.
them in the foot,
Just
yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that was
destroyed
brutal.
because
The
they're not
idea
having-
that
nobody
China's
was
going to
having
rise
goals.
up and be a sustained superpower after the next couple decades is just
I don't-
laughable on the basis
No.
of demographics alone. It can't
There's
Nobody
a
saw
lot of
that
people
coming.
that are talking about that right now. Like, demographic data is apparently some of the most quantitative and empirical data to look at when it comes to forecasting GDP, nations' growth, and things of that nature. And yeah, like, I don't know, for those listening, I shared a chart earlier of just showing U.S. fertility rates. In the 1800s, it was 7. Was the average amount of children a woman would have, and then in 2020 we're down to 1.78. And so, another part of this argument that is really worth discussing is there is a far left ideology that says there are too many people on this planet and less is better.
Oh yeah.
And
It's
it is
anti-human.
it is
Okay,
so
pause, though.
wrong.
Because it is a lot. Like, I don't think people understand. Like, when we were born in the 80s, there were only like 4 billion people on this planet. And there's like
It's double that
almost
now.
8
Yeah.
now.
And what other
Okay.
like
In
I was gonna
30
say,
something
what is-
years.
So what?
So-
But ultimately, that doesn't have an effect on what the world can supply and support. Like, the world can supply and support far bigger numbers.
This whole
than that.
argument is
we wouldn't
based
be able
on
to
something.
hit that number.
This whole
that
argument
wouldn't sustain.
is based on something called the law of commons. And the law of commons says that anybody that has specific rights to a specific piece of land, let's use this analogy. So the way the analogy goes is you have 1 acre. And on this 1 acre, everyone in the village it's like a state park. You can use it as much as you want. Well, the thing starts to break down and the argument changes when you have too many people trying to use this 1 acre of land. This is where you get into national parks having a lottery system and things of that nature. However, when you look at the entire globe, the amount of square footage of livable land, we are nowhere near at capacity when it
Right.
comes to running out of space to such an extent that we are harming the earth. Now, that is not saying we should not be wise and focus on non-pollutive techniques and solutions.
Oh, I wasn't
supposed
even
to be
talking about
stewards.
that.
Right.
I'm just talking about the systems that we have in place. I don't disagree with you that it's
No, but the
possible.
argument for having less children is specifically a green argument. It is an ecology argument.
Climate
It is
change.
it is a climate change argument. It is there's so many people here, it's harming the earth, and Mother Nature is just so delicate, and we must care for her so well that we need to have less babies. And the main,
Not a
in my
good mother.
opinion, rebuttal to this is there's a lot of people, trigonometry podcast, Constantine covered this, where it's like people start focusing on the green ecology of the planet when they're no longer starving and when their
Right.
children are not dying from the
Right.
cold. And
Right.
and so, like at its core, population decline matters because it's a failure in long-term thinking. Because what's going to happen to GDP, social services, other
Social
forms
security.
of things that you rely on in
Right.
30 to 40 years, with a population decline, everything starts to
And
fall
to
apart.
Josh's point, those of us who have children, really the social divide that we're on one side of is between those of us who have had children or raising children, all of that stuff, and all of the useless, childless people who are going to want to exploit them through government confiscation in order to facilitate their retirement. Like, so there's probably a group of people, I imagine, that would have heard what Josh said and be like, oh, you're exploiting your children, blah, 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 etc. And it's like, wait, no, you childless, useless person want to exploit his children via the government to facilitate your retirement. Okay?
Yeah, me and my friends are raising taxpayers.
And so
And
I
economic
resent that idea.
contributors.
I'm actually contributing to the, not just presently by being an
the
economic
future.
participant in society, but I'm contributing to the continuation of it. And
Yep.
then all of those people who would lecture us about,
Was it
oh,
Greece?
well, is that green to...
What's that song from Greece? Do it for our country, the red, white, and the blue. Do you remember that when they're in the bomb shelter? Got to cut that in.
Oh my gosh.
One of the things, maybe a question to ask that I have heard, like every single time that I bring this conversation up with somebody, Christian or non-Christian, doesn't matter who.
Yeah.
One of the questions that arises is, well, not everybody is fit to be a parent. Like
Facts.
right?
I don't disagree
but
with
here's
that.
Here's the thing. They will
Please
use that as an
opt out
excuse.
of the
Hold on.
biological system.
They will opt out of having kids as an excuse to say, well, I know myself. I would be a terrible parent, so I'm just not going to be a parent, right?
How about
I'm not gonna
do
have
better?
kids.
How about just do better? Right?
mean,
Like, that's
so-
the real answer. The real answer is, so you're telling me you're self-aware
Oh.
enough to realize that you'd be a garbage parent. And so your answer to that is to just
abdicate responsibility.
abdicate responsibility and not have the forcing function to get better.
That,
Like-
on top of, I would say, to your point, I love this point, Anderson, where it's like, this conversation is not trying to convince people that think they shouldn't be parents to go be parents. Let me just be clear. If you don't think you would be a good parent, I'm totally okay with you not reproducing. We have other people that can handle this.
Unless you're a Christian, in which case, don't get bitter, get better, and then have babies.
Get better.
I don't actually think I agree with you on that, Nick. I think that I think the amount of I think like what Josh was talking about the forcing function, that incentive, because not everybody's going to clear that hurdle. That's true. Some people are going to be bad parents, okay, but
Dude,
all
that's-
of them will have a heavenly Father.
Yes.
Okay.
And
So.
sorry,
So the
Go
idea
ahead.
that you just choose, say, oh, no, you're right. You're below the threshold of acceptable parenthood, so you should just abandon any effort to
dude.
embrace the incentives that are going to do
I didn't
for
say
you.
abandon. I said let's
That's
just
sanctif-
force them. That's all I
Right.
said.
Okay,
I'm
but
not
check
trying to
this out.
force them to have children.
There's a
obviously.
reason.
Like,
There's a
all I
reason the teen
That's all I
pregnancy. There's a reason the teen pregnancy trope existed for such a long time as like a movie, like script and like
Yeah.
a story, is because it's literally the, like, you have two narratives. And I feel like there were more movies about this when we were growing up. There's like the failure to launch narrative, which is
Yeah.
like the guy living in the parents' basement not doing anything right. And then there's like the immature knucklehead who gets a girl pregnant and has to like rise to the occasion, right? Like this is that, but that's the whole idea. And so there's this other piece of this equation that we haven't talked about, which is delayed adolescence. And really, I think that's really what the whole dink thing is. The whole dink thing
Yeah.
is like it's delayed adolescence in
oh yeah, because
in family dynamics. Like you've already
Maybe I've
pushed
said
the
this-
envelope. You've already pushed the envelope to not even getting married, or like maybe you got married in your late 20s, early 30s. Now, or even if you did get married in your 20s, like you're not even going to think about having children until, like, so many people are even having children until their 30s. Like you've basically just pushed the envelope into middle age. We are biologically wired to start having babies in our teens.
Yep.
Like, think about that. Like, I'm not suggesting that we push it that far back because of the way things are in our society, but like, our 30s, really? Like, I see so many 30-somethings. Like, I'm 37, and I see people, you know, in their like 32, 33 having their first kid. And I'm like, how are you doing that? Like,
I mean, that was
Right.
me.
I mean, think
That's
about
exhausting.
all
I
the
know
energy
it was
you
you.
had to stay up all night, drinking and doing what else in your 20s. Like, I guarantee you that is not what that reservoir of energy was for.
it's like now you had a baby and you're like, I now understand why. I'm sorry, I'm talking smack, but you guys are kind of in that boat.
No,
So
they showed up to our. No, here's the thing. This is how I look at that cohort, that, like you said, the extended adolescence, and it's a perfect analogy because when you're a kid, and maybe I've said this before, but when you're a kid and you've got a candy bar and you're sitting in front of the TV watching your favorite cartoons, you're like, this is the best. This is
Peak
all I want to
existence.
do. And when I grow up, I'm not going to be like one of these idiot boring adults. I'm going to go get more candy bars and I'm going to watch cartoons
bigger
for
TV,
even longer.
surround
Right.
sound.
But then you actually grow up and you realize, oh, actually the same things aren't satisfying to me. And so
No.
that is how we, those of us who have children, look at you. You are the
Grown-ups.
child insisting that you're going to want to gorge yourself on nothing but candy for the rest
Yep.
of your life, as if, because here's the difference is we have been where those childless people, those people living selfish lives were.
Yeah.
You have not been where we are, and we
That's
made
right.
this choice and would make it again every day.
And therefore, we can make a podcast episode dunking on you. You can't stop us. I'm sorry. That's a joke. Relax, folks.
No,
we love you too.
I know. I
Yeah.
endorsed it fully. No joke.
All right, never mind. We're not backpedaling. Full speed ahead. Anyway, but
Full
that's the
speed ahead.
point. That whole idea of like the delayed adolescence thing is really critical because it is that idea of, we're sitting here talking about how awesome Disney World is, and you're like content to like sit in the car with the Happy Meal. Like come on, like get out of the car. Come see the show. It's a lot of fun. It's great. It's incredibly fulfilling.
It is. And I'm actually
And-
curious, if you're still here and you're still listening, leave a comment as to how many kids you have. I would love to know. Like, I'm going to go ahead and self-disclose 3. My wife and I want to aim for 4. Like and subscribe if you guys are still here. We would love to hear what your thoughts have been about this because, again, like I wanted to talk about it, 1, because it's fresh. I just had a baby 4 days ago. And then 2, it's like, I'm tired of people knocking on parenting. And so, like...
I'm so sick of it.
I'm so sick of it. It makes me want to vomit, and like I don't want to hang out with those parents when they do it. It's like, I don't know. People, we shouldn't be knocking the thing that is, in my opinion, the most fulfilling, best thing you could possibly do with the time that you have on this earth before you go spend it with God. So it's like, hey,
and I'm done not rubbing their faces in it because you used to not do that out of a belief that everybody who could have kids was, and the people who didn't couldn't, or for whatever extenuating
polite.
reasons.
Yep.
And that's not what's happening anymore. So I'm gonna rub your faces in it. It's better. You're
Do
missing
better.
out. You're gorging yourself on candy, and you're going to vomit later, and I'm not going to feel sorry for you.
and
Yeah.
our tax dollars will hopefully not be wiping your bum when the time comes.
You're welcome for our service. Till next time. This has been the I'm Telling God About This podcast. Like and subscribe.
Bye-bye.